Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So one of my subscribers the other day was beginning to host Navidrome. And Navidrome is your own private open source self-hosted Spotify. This one's not particularly new, but I thought what I would do is show you how to host Navidrome inside of an Incus OCI container. Let's head over to their page that describes how to install this application with Docker, and it's really a very simple Docker Compose file consisting of the image for Navidrome, a definition of a port mapping, and really two volumes, one of which is the data volume for the application, and the other one points to wherever your music collection happens to be located. Here I am on a terminal over on my Incus server, and if you've never performed an installation of an OCI container before, if you do an Incus remote list, you're not going to have this listing specifying a Docker container. And so we need to have a Docker repository installed. So if you don't have that, the command is incus remote add docker and then https://docker.io, and then in the end -- protocol equals OCI. In my particular case, that already exists. If you followed my Incus container step by step, then you have a device on your system called Bridge 0, and so I'm going to do an Incus network create OCI, and I'm going to make the type Mac VLAN, and the parent will be Bridge 0. Let's create our Navidrome container with the command incus init docker, and then the name of the Navidrome container repository, and then Navidrome will be the name of that particular container, and then I'm going to say boot.autostart equals to true, which means that when the Incus server starts, this container starts. And then we're using the OCI network, which we just created. Notice that we didn't start this container, we did an incus init rather than an incus launch, and that's because we have a few things that we want to do with it first. We're going to do an incus storage volume create default Navidrome-data, which will be the data volume for our Navidrome program. The Navidrome-data storage volume is stored in the default storage pool, as you can see here. In order to provide read-write access to it, we're going to say Incus storage volume set default Navidrome-data security.shifted equals to true. Let's go look at all the volumes in the default storage pool with the command incus storage volume list default. The Navidrome container has a volume in the storage pool, and we have the custom volume for the data that we created, and then we have one other volume which is simply an image for a container that I may have created previously. Let's add or connect that storage volume to our container with an incus config device add Navidrome, and this is just an arbitrary name here, but we're using the volume called Navidrome data. It's of type disk, and it's coming from the default storage pool, and the name of the source is Navidrome data, which is the name of the custom volume you see here, and the path is /data, because that's the path inside the container that we noted from the Docker Compose file. We need a location to reference my music collection, so I'm going to do a make_dir music, and that's just going to be a folder here located on my Incus server. Since I do not want my entire music collection located on my Incus server, and rather my music collection is located on my NAS, I'm going to go ahead and do a sudo nano on /etc/fstab, and fstab is the file system table that mounts volumes that are located outside of the local file system. So what I'm going to do in my particular case is I'm going to go ahead and do an NFS mount, and this is different for you. It kind of depends on where your music is located. I have the address of my QNAP NAS here. I have the NFS share name over in a QNAP NAS, which just happens to be /music. And then the local file that we just created, or the local folder, is in /home/scott/music. And then it is an NFS volume. And then we're mounting it with the defaults and then no fail, which will prevent this from hanging when the system boots. And underbar netdev says to go wait for the network before it attempts to do this NFS mount. I do a Control O and Enter to save that file out, and a Control X to exit the Nano editor. Since I modified the file systems table, it's a good practice to do a sudo systemctl daemons-reload. I want to test to make sure that all my NFS volumes, which is one NFS volume, will mount correctly. So I'm doing a mount or sudo mount -a -t, which means test all NFS volumes. And when I hit enter, it says bad option for several file systems. It could be NFS or CIFS, and it says you might need a helper program. And what it's looking for in this particular case is we have to install the NFS tools first. So we're doing a sudo apt install nfs-common-y, and that will go ahead and install the NFS-common dependencies so that we can mount NFS volumes. And now that that's completed, let's go back up and do that sudo mount -a-t NFS. And since it did not come back with any kind of an error, that means that it is a valid syntax. So let's remove the -t for test, and it will go ahead and mount our volume. To prove that our volume has been mounted, I can do an ls here, and the reverse video in music shows that it is in fact mounted. Now that our music library is correctly mounted, we need to associate that with the container. And the way I'm doing that is an Incus config device add Navidrome. That's just an arbitrary name. And then the name of the particular share is going to be music, and it's of type disk. And it should look in /home/scott/music, which is where we mounted it right here. And then the path inside the container is /music. And again, we derive that from looking at the Docker compose file. At this point, everything should be ready to go, and we can do an Incus start on Navidrome. And then we can do an Incus list, and the address of my Navidrome is 172.16.1.179. I head back up to my web browser and I head over to a new tab and I go to 172.16.1.179, in my case, :4533, because Navidrome runs on port 4553 or 4533. And now I'll go ahead and type in Scott as my username. I'll go ahead and type in a password, confirm that password, and we've created my admin account. And Navidrome pops up, and here are all of the various collections and songs. Of course, you can play things from here. If you follow the Navidrome website, it will teach you how you can also connect to your Navidrome server with a variety of clients in order to play your music. And right now, it should be going out and scanning all of the files out there and finding thumbnails if they exist in the folders and filling them in accordingly. One of the questions that you might have is what happens when the Navidrome container gets updated on the Docker Hub. And the answer is that you can turn around and stop the container with an Incus stop Navidrome, and then you can do an Incus rebuild and the name of the container, and it will go ahead and pull the new container if there are any updates. And once you get your command prompt back, you simply do an Incus start on Navidrome and it will be back up and running again. If I head back to my terminal here and repaint, it really doesn't skip a beat since it doesn't really log off or anything else. It just goes down very momentarily, but we have the credentials cached here in the browser, so it's continuing to run. And if we had a newer version, it would have updated that version here. I had been getting a lot of requests from subscribers about going over applications that can use OCI containers. And I thought Navidrome was one really simple example of how you can use an OCI container to deploy an application. And we created a container for Navidrome, and then we pointed to your existing music library through an NFS mount back to wherever your music is located. And then for the non-volatile data, we went ahead and created an Incus volume in the default storage pool, and we used that volume from the OCI container for Navidrome. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel. Don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.